Welcome you all to the Ayurveda network. Myself, I am Dr. Sathya N, Dornala, working as Panchakarma specialist at 𝐕𝐬𝐬𝑒𝑚 Ayurvedic Panchakarma Hospital, Delhi, Bharat. I am going to discuss on the topic Seeds of Epigenetic Dynamics, Ayurveda framework. And most of you heard the word genetics, and most of us we have read during our school days and very popular Mendelian, the peace experiment. We could recollect that. But conventional understanding, we all have something which is in minds, that is about the genetics. And after the genetics, and something, it's a new branch of science which is upcoming, and maybe a decade, to the max 2 decades. You may consider it is in budding stage, as the perception and understanding of this particular field is gradually and broadening. So that's what the epigenetics. How we, being an Ayurvedists, understand how exactly these epigenetic mechanisms from Ayurvedic perception. And I made an acronym SEEDS. So SEEDS is something, there are the factors, I made it an acronym of SEEDS, which modulate these epigenetic mechanisms. And we'll see in the further slides. Coming to the introduction. Every human being has 2 basic instincts, that is self-preservation and survival of the species. The self-preservation means he himself has to preserve and protect the health. So thereby he himself preserve for the longer duration. And naturally, the desire of every species is to continue or every animal to continue our own species. So in both the ways, in both the cases, of course, the genetics and the epigenetics plays the role. And the moment as you say, the genetics and the epigenetics, it is something which is more of a technical and a scientific subject. It is essential to have some basic terminology, just overview of the basic terminology, which you very frequently come across through the lectures. So the word genes. If you look at this word genes in the first line of the slide, that is generations. The 4 letters of this generations is that is gene. So I consider this as impressions and the imprints of the generations is we consider as genes. And truly a literal meaning of genes is offspring and the procreation. It's a basic physical and functional unit of heredity. Gene occupies a fixed position locus on a chromosome, and genes achieve their effects by directing the synthesis of proteins, and are made up of DNA and are the working and subunits chunks of the DNA. And the genomes, as a human being, every human being has one genome, and the number of genes in human genome is almost 20,000, and the number of cells in human body almost 100 trillion cells, and the chromosome in a human cell is the 46 chromosome, it is 23 pairs. And coming to the genotype, that is genetic makeup. We all know heredity is the sum of all biological processes by which particular characteristics are transmitted from parents to their offspring. Genotype determines the broad limits of the features an organism can develop, and it remains constant throughout the organism's lifetime. And coming to the other terminology, that is phenotype, that is we consider as a physical makeup. It is organism's outward appearance and the developmental outcome of its genes. It includes an organism's bodily structures, physiological processes, and behaviors. It depends on the complex interactions between the genes and environments. And in a phenotypic development, the contribution of genes is only the 20%, and the remaining 80% is the environment influences the outward expression. That's what the expression of the genetic expression, that is being maximum influenced by the environment. So phenotype is, truly speaking, it is the interaction of the genes and the environment. Same DNA and different look. As I said, almost we have an 100 trillion cells, and every cell has the same DNA. But there are different organs in the body and different bodily systems. And each cell has the same DNA, still the cells in the liver, the cells in the heart, cells in the brain look differently. What makes the having the cells the same genetic makeup and looking different? So something which is there behind the genes. So where the role of epigenetics comes into. Central dogma of life. So where the genetics is, whole genetics is depends on this. The DNA, you all know, there's a blueprint of life. The life code comes from the DNA. This particular code is being transcribed onto the RNA by the process of transcription, which in further translated onto the ribosomes to prepare the proteins by the process of translation. So gene is being expressed in two steps, that is DNA is transcribed onto the RNA, and then RNA is translated to the protein. This is how there are two places where gene is being expressed. The genetic code which is there in DNA, one expression is the transcription and transcribe the genetic code onto the RNA. That's one level, the level of genetic expression. And the second level of genetic expression is the code which is being transferred onto the RNA, further translated into the ribosomes so as to make further proteins. The proteins are the workhorses of the cells, and amino acids are the building blocks of the proteins. Coming to the genetics, the word genetics, which is the study of genes, heredity, and genetic variations in living organisms. The true meaning of genetic is generative, that is, Genesis means it's the beginning. And he's the man, Conrad Hall Waddington, he's the pioneer of this, in this field, epigenetics. And in his words, the study of mechanisms by which the genotype produces the phenotype in the context of the development, which is given in the 1942. And the later developments in the field of this epigenetics has put forth many definitions. In 1987, the changes in gene activity during development are generally referred to as epigenetics. And as a whole, it is the processes by which organisms access and use the information stored in DNA. And a very popular definition which you usually see and come across, that is changes in gene activity, that is expression, without affecting the basic structure of the gene. Gene remains the same, but doesn't do what was programmed. Either genes may be silenced, that is preventing gene expression, or genes may be enhanced, increase the gene expression, or maybe the genes may be changed, transmit to the next gene. Sometimes changes can be reversed. So, genome and the epigenome. As in the earlier slides, we've gone through the basic idea of what exactly the genetics and the genome, and epigenetics and what exactly the epigenome. And if we look at in a comparative aspect, in a simple terms, genome provides a blueprint for life, and epigenome will tell us how this whole thing gets executed, what determines and when and where genes are switched on and off to produce a person. And of course, it is the hardware of life, and the epigenome is the software of life. Just imagine you have purchased a laptop and everything is inbuilt. Until unless the softwares are not onto the So system, it's not going to the proton. So the things will not run. So for example, you buy a printer, until unless we don't have the drivers to run the printer, so the printer again the same. The printer comes as it's a kind of hardware, and the drivers are the software. So drives which actually drives the printer. So that's how they were drivers are the epigenome and the printer is the genome. And if it terms were still further simplification, the genome is the alphabets of language of life, and the epigenome is the grammar of the life, grammar of the language of life. And the whole genetics versus epigenetics refers to the study of heredity and the variations of inherited characteristics, whereas epigenetic refers to the study of inheritable changes in the organisms caused by the modification of gene expression. And studies, if you go through this slide, and there are details are given how in a comparative perspective. Your epigenetic life, how these epigenetic mechanisms process all through the life, from preconception to the maturity, and even up to the aging also, till the death. Some epigenetic tags are from parents to passed on to the spring during the preconception phase, and during embryo, cells develop specialized functions by epigenetic instructions, and during infancy and the childhood, epigenetic remains flexible through early growth stages as environment and nutritional conditions damage. And nutrition and environmental exposures affect the epigenetic inheritance of future generations. Gene silencing through targeted nutrition allows epigenetic mechanism of action to prevent or delay that to particularly adult and maturity. So this is how the epigenetic mechanism is with the life. And there are references available with respect to the epigenetics, considering as a biological punctuation. And how this beautiful is, this example is given in this slide. An English professor asked the students to punctuate the following by writing in a statement: a woman without her man is nothing. And all the males in the class wrote, a woman without her man, comma, is nothing. And whereas the females in the class wrote, a woman, colon, without her, comma, man is nothing. And in both the cases, the statement is same, and the expression of the meaning of both the statements written by the males and the females of the same class differs. So this is how the expression is being controlled by the epigenetics. So this epigenetic spin on it's like a nature versus nurture. So nature always refers to the biological and genetic predisposition impact on human traits, and the nurture describes influence of learning and other influences from one's own environment. It is how the nature and nurture is the interaction is being, and how the individual is being nurtured further in future course of life. A few examples of biologically determined characteristics nature include certain genetic disease, eye color, hair color, and skin color. Other things like life expectancy, height have also strong biological component, but they are also influenced by environment factors and lifestyle. Nurture versus example. Height is another example of a trait that is influenced by nature and nurture interaction. For example, a mother have delivered identical twins. After the delivery, one infant is being carried to the other Western countries, other one is brought up in the Eastern countries. Over the period of life, maybe after the crossing their adolescent age, if you growth and development, if you compare both the identical twins, so definitely there is a huge difference. Though both are the identical twins and have everything the same. Here the point is how both the children both have the identical twins, still the environment, how these both the kids were nurtured during their course of life, that actually influences the expression of the genetic code which is carrying in both the kids. So then a beautiful pictorial depiction, and nature is genes and hereditary factors, physical appearance and personality characteristics. And nurture is environmental variable, childhood experiences, how we were raised, and social relationships and surrounding culture. And epigenetic writers, erasers and readers. Epigenetic changes are performed by enzymes known as writers, which can add epigenetic modifications erasers which erase epigenetic modifications, and readers which can recognize epigenetic modification and cause a downstream effect. Each cell has an epigenetic signature. It's like a barcode, and this barcode has to be read properly. What do epigenetic marks do? If DNA is like the alphabet, the epigenetic marks are like the accents and the punctuation. The DNA is like a book, the epigenetic marks are like sticky notes. And there are well proved, there are three mechanisms how this epigenetic regulations being modulated. And among them, two are the important, that is DNA methylation and histone modification. And its DNA methylation is something which is addition of methyl group or a chemical cap to the part of the DNA molecule which prevents certain genes from being expressed. And whereas histone modifications or the histones are the proteins that DNA wraps around. Without histones, DNA would be too long to fit inside cells. If histones squeeze DNA tightly, then DNA cannot read by the cell. So modifications that relax the histones can make the DNA accessible to proteins that read genes. Epigenetic is a missing link. It is like it is a control between DNA RNA, that is between instructions and the behavior. And how this epigenetic mechanisms influences diseases. Every cell, as we know in the previous slide, it is clear that every cell has their epigenetic switches, and almost all the epigenetic switches are in the inactive phase. As long as they are being exposed to certain kind of environment, and they become active, maybe overactive, maybe underactive, and so again it depends on the environment which is he or she is being exposed, that actually switch on the genes. And epigenetics is the changing destinies, that is a hidden power believed to control the future events, that is fate, and the events that will necessarily happen to a particular person or thing in the future. And simply, epi means beyond, that is genetics. Definitely epigenetics is the conventional understanding of genetics which we all know, and something which is beyond the understanding of genetics is conceived in epigenetics. And it simply is this: the food we eat, the air you breathe, the water you drink, the thoughts you think, the feelings you feel, the exercise you do, and the lifestyle you lead can all powerfully influence your genetic expression. Traditional and Ayurveda framework. In Indian traditions, particularly southern part of India, people, particularly infertile couples, offers prayers to these serpent gods. There are two twined snakes, and one is another twined snake. So contemporarily, we may correlate with this double twined snake into DNA double helix model, and whereas on one twined snake is an RNA. The DNA is the blueprint of life, which carries the code of life, and which is further transcribed onto this code is further transcribed onto the RNA, and from there it is transcribed onto the DNA. So that's how the understanding of this genetics and epigenetics is there in the Indian tradition. And Tridosha or Tristuna. So, Tridosha or Tristuna, or the Vata, Pitta, Kapha are considered Tristuna, the three pillars of life. They are being vitiated there, the Tridoshas. And this overexpression and underexpression, overexpression, the Prakopa and underexpression, Ikshaya is also a kind of the epigenetic mechanism, epigenetic processes. And though the person is usually considering these three doshas, the human beings are categorized into Vata dominant Prakriti, Pitta dominant Prakriti, and Kapha dominant Prakriti. Though the person is Vata dominant Prakriti genotype, but all the corresponding attributes which are described for the Vata dominant Prakriti, we don't see in the individuals, are not being expressed in the individual, which is being modulated by the associated dosha, that is phenotype. It is again an epigenetic description which is usually available in Ayurveda. And there are षड् bhavas, we call as a procreative factors. In Ayurveda, Sharirasthana, in embryology, they are described these 6 factors, so which modulate the procreation of an individual. That is Matraja, Pitruja, Atmaja, Sattvaja, Satmyaja, and Rasaja. And the first two factors, that is Matrija, that is maternal, and Pitrija, paternal, is usually considered as genetic mechanisms, and the remaining all Atmaja, Sattvaja, and Satmita, Rasaja are. So these are factors which modulate the epigenetic mechanisms. So this is how the procreative factors, which corresponding features, we can go through this slide in detail, and which are self-explanatory in nature. And transgenerational inheritance. In Ayurveda, it is strongly described, that is Atulya Gotriya Vivaha. So usually it is there in the Indian tradition that when you go to for any match, for search for a match in any marriage, so in the good olden days, in the previous traditions, earlier tradition, it is there in that we should verify the things up to the seven previous generations. So previous seven generations, to choose a choice for a marriage. So this again the same, it is to avoid Atulya, that's what Atulya Gotriya we had, to avoid the inheritance of the acquired characteristics, is what the epigenetic. And epigenetic memory is like in a seventh sense, its grandma experience leave a mark on your genes. Epigenetic is important because the genome remembers. Genes that have been turned on off early in life may not work properly when needed later in life. So coming to that, as I said, I made an acronym, that is SEEDS, how these seeds modulate the dynamics of epigenetic mechanisms. So how these modulate, maybe the overexpression, underexpression, maybe in the switch off mode. So these are seeds means S is sleep, and E means exercise, another E is environment, education, D is diet and digitalization and stress and social connectivity. All these examples considering how the things are happening in the contemporary society. So this is how the sleep. In Ayurveda, sleep has the Ahara, Nidra and Brahmacharya. These three are considered as a Trayopastambha, three supporting pillars of life. Three supporting pillars of life, Ahara, Nidra and Brahmacharya. Tristun are the three pillars of life, and Ahara, Nidra and Brahmacharya are three supporting pillars of the life. And this importance of sleep, how beautifully is detailed in Charaka Samhita Sutrasthana. The dichotomies are happiness and misery, nourishment and emaciation, strength and weakness, virility and sterility, knowledge and ignorance, life and death. All these depend on the proper and improper sleep. So this is how the things are so in strong proof that. So the sleep definitely modulated the expression of all the genes, which in turn falls under the heading of the epigenetic references. And these are different effects of sleep deprivation, heritability, cognitive impairment, and more or less sleep deprivation has an impact on all the bodily systems. And there are n number of articles, research articles, which are available in the world-class top journals, which are also available in the open source in the PubMed. So there is an article published in the Nature that is a distinctive DNA methylation pattern in insufficient sleep. So you may go through this article in detail, and how this in description is given, how the sleep influences the modulate the epigenetic mechanisms. That is one of the epigenetic mechanism, DNA methylation. And other one article, that is short-term sleep deprivation leads to decreased systemic redox metabolites and altered epigenetic status. Again the same, so as the benefits and the importance of sleep is described by Acharyas of Ayurveda. So which were further strongly getting sound footing and by these researchers. So published in PLOS ONE and other, which is also again another study from Frontiers in Neural Circuits, that is sleep deprivation and the epigenome. And other further, that epigenetics some data. Not only the thing in Ayurveda, the right sleep and proper sleep and the right time is the major fundamental aspect. And if you sleep in the daytime, again that has also been described in Ayurveda, that is Diva Swapnam Sarvadosha Prakopam. Again the Sarvadosha Prakopam is sleep and the linkage of the dosha expression, over expression of dosha is a epigenetic mechanism. And it's something the study in support of that is available, that is epigenetics of daytime sleep. There is a study published, and you may go through this study. So there is again a study published in the journal Anesthesia. So night shifters, your DNA could be at risk. And interestingly, here the study found that this particularly they all included the doctors of the profession, and they found that DNA repair gene expression decreased and DNA breaks increased after the sleep deprivation. And one more interesting, damaged DNA increased after only one night sleep deprivation. So this is the point to be noted down. In Ayurveda, it's clearly written that so Ratri Jagaranam Vata Prakopam. This Vata Prakopa with respect to the Ratri Jagarana is has an impact at the even at the level of DNA. So even they proved in a sense, so damaged DNA increased even only after one night of sleep deprivation. That's how sleep has so much of important in day-to-day life. The reason it is being included under the heading of Trayopastambha. And coming to the second E of first E of the seed, that is exercise Vyayama. So Vyayama is again it is falls under the category of that is Trayopastambha. Contextually and contemporarily, this Trayopastambha you may consider as a Samakali and Trayopastambha, that is Ahara, Nidra and Vyayama. So opposite to the Vyayama exercise, these days more everybody is kind of desktop jobs, and these desktop jobs has led the people to the long-term sitting, and so they are just for their desktops, and it's leading to the so sitting for hours together. Almost half of the day they are in the sitting phase. So this leads to the physical inactivity, and the recent study in the world intellectuals is claiming that sitting is a kind of new smoking, as the reason is that, as you know, the smoking is established factor for the causation of the cancer, and these smoking is a sitting is also becoming like so emerging as a smoking like factor, which is leading to the almost all the chronic non-communicable diseases. And this physical activity in the prevention of human disease, role of epigenetic modification. So that's how physical activity has an influence and the capacity of modulation of epigenetic modifications. And you know, this exercise leads to there are three modifications: the DNA methylation, histone modification, and mRNA expression. And this further DNA methylation leads to the increases this physical activity increases the acute inflammation, whereas minimizes the chronic inflammation and SMF differentiation, and all these mechanisms ultimately leads to the preventive and the rehabilitative effects on the atherosclerosis, hypertension, and the heart failure patients. So, and epigenetic changes due to physical activity. So this is another supporting evidence for the claim that how exercise does have the effect on this. And additional again the same excessive exercise may damage the gut, as we discussed in the sleep pattern also. Anything which is ati sarvatra varjayet, again the same principle applies to the exercise also. Ati vyayam is also so similarly a kind of vata prakopa causes vata prakopa, and as the vata is having the major site is pakvashya. So naturally the main site of vata is gets damaged, and it's further it damages the gut. So, and we may consider as under the exercise, exercise that is vyavayam. So sex keeps you healthy. Risk of heart disease can be lowered by 30% and diabetes by 40%, having the sex at least once a week. And there's another field is upcoming considering the benefits of the exercise, that is exerciseonomics. So how working out may make us healthier? There are a study reported from India that the people who exercise have different proteins in their bloodstream. That's what the proteins is. This expression, which is the things which is the code which is transcribed from the DNA to the RNA, which is further translated to the ribosomes for the making the proteins. So this how they have the different proteins in their blood, so who have a good physical activity. And coming to the third E of epigenetic dynamics, that is environment. And another E is the education and spiritual. Environment is coming to how this environment has an so interaction of the genes and the environment is what the epigenetics. So this actually influences the genome, that is the DNA sequence, and which influence in a way maybe the overexpression, maybe the underexpression, and which leads to the normal physiology. Altered physiology again leads to the disease. So how this particular slide shows that how this epigenome is an adaptation and the balance between the evolutionary adaptation and the disease risk. So it's how being your diet and lifestyle, how we are maintaining your diet and healthy diet and the lifestyle, you will be into the evolutionary adaptation of the newer environmental exposure. And if you are not following your healthy diet and lifestyle, which leads to individual to the disease risk. So as I said repeatedly, we are discussing that epigenetic is something which is interaction of the genes and the environment. That is what leads to the genetic expression. So this particular in the journal is exclusively on the epigenomics. Editorial is epigenetics is the where the environment and society and genetics meet. This is how the influence of environment and environment influences on the epigenome exposure of the DNA methylation in human populations. So all these studies published in the top journals, which in support of the evidence and this claim that environment has a strongest influence on the epigenetic mechanisms. So it is a complex relationship, epigenetics and the environment, and these are the different pathways how environment exposure modulate the genetics and the epigenetics. In the way when it comes to the genetics, environmental exposure, if it leads to the DNA damage, that is mutations, that leads to the health will have effects. Whereas when it comes to the epigenetics, the expression of the genes will vary. In the genetics, it is the change in the DNA damage that is called as mutations. And epigenetic transgenerational actions of the environment factors in disease etiology. So this is published in Swell, and this again further evidence to the statement that how this environmental factors and other these in the current era, we have directly or indirectly have been exposed to these different kind of environmental pollutants. Air is particulate matter and pass, and the water, heavy metals and soil, endocrine disruptor chemicals and plastic, persistent organic pollutants, smoking. And these are the commonest environmental pollutants which knowingly, unknowingly, we are all being exposed to these different kind of environmental pollutants. So which of course influences in longer duration, it influences epigenetic expression. And coming to the education and the spiritual education, how during how this antenatal period is being passed on to a mother, so in a women. So in Ayurveda, we call a Garbha Sanskar, that prenatal education. In Indian philosophy, in Indian literatures, mythology, we have the different stories. Then Abhimanyu is a character in the son of Arjuna, learned how to enter the Chakravyuha, the strategic arrangement of areas to entrap and defeat the enemy when he was in his mother's womb. So Abhimanyu had heard and remembered the narration of the technique by Krishna to Subhadra, to his sister Subhadra during her pregnancy. So that's what it's an antenatal awakening. And another one is learning from the womb. That is another mythological story. That when Prahlad's mother was pregnant with him, she used to listen to a devotional song. Therefore, even though Prahlad took birth in a Rakshasa family, so he became the devotee of Lord Vishnu. So he learned mantra Hari from his womb when his mother was blessed by Narada. So that's how the antenatal learning and antenatal environment has a major impact on the future onset of the adult diseases and future onset of not only the disease, future onset of the healthy outcomes. So very recently, there is again the studies under process, the treatment of brain injury to be aided by Mahamudranjaya Mantra in RML hospital. So maybe the people who are under coma, so Mahamudranjaya Mantra is being chanted on their behalf. So it definitely, it's the preliminary results showing an encouraging area. So coming to the D is a diet, that is ahara. So science of epigenetics is you are what your mother ate, and the fate of your genes, the word itself is an aid. The fate of your genes is being controlled by what you ate. That's what your diet. And there is an Ayurveda proverb, well-known proverb in Ayurveda is, when diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. When diet is correct, and medicine is of no need. So patya sati gadarthasya kimoshada nishevana, patya sati gadarthasya kimoshada nishevana. So this statement, this when diet is wrong, medicine is of no use. And further to add this, I say this: when diet is wrong, so genes are out of control. When diet is correct, genes are under control. So this is in addition to with respect to the epigenetics. So gut DNA, gut microbiome, the second pool of the person genetic material, 100 trillion bacteria in the gut have their own DNA. So the number of DNA microbiome is which is 10 times more than our body own cells. So definitely, if it is more than 10 times, so their cells also influence on us. So it is essential to maintain the harmony with the gut microbiome. Again, the expression of this gut microbiome also influences the epigenetics. This is a very popular example for the epigenetic mechanisms, that is agouti yellow mouse, how the methane environment influences disease offspring. So this agouti yellow mouse is naturally, it is an obese in nature, and usually been given normal diet, and among the offspring, three are obese and yellow, and they are more prone to disease. And this particular agouti yellow mice is given diet rich in methyl groups during this pregnancy. And the interesting aspect is, though it is naturally, it is obese and yellow in golden yellow in color, but as it is been given diet rich in methyl groups, it led to the three brown and lean uh, baby mouse, and they are not prone to any disease. So this is how a specific diet, though the nature genetic makeup of this sagot yellow mice is golden yellow color and obese in nature, but still, if it is during those pregnancy, if it is being given the specific diet, and the genes which are more the switches corresponding to this particular genes were being switched off, and the particular expression of that the genes were not being allowed. So that indirectly the genes are silenced. So that's how it led to the brown colored and lean this thing. And it is epigenetic is definitely a new bridge between the nutrition and health. So this particular article gives a detailed description how this linkage between the nutrition and aging and the cancer. So there are different mechanisms which has a strong influence. So coming to the digitalization, the current era is entire the day we are living in a digitalized world. So it is digitalization. It's again the integration of digital technologies into the everyday life by the digitization of everything that can be digitized. So we are living in technology, and internet has become a way of life. And particularly the most of the pregnants who use very widely, and so during the throughout the antenatal period, and particularly first 3 years of the pregnant the child's life. So that is in a phase where the major developments happens in the brain development. So during those particular the core period of the human's individual's life, if you are being exposed to the digitalization, so natural expression of mechanisms are maybe switched on, maybe gets hyper expression. So again, that is very important area where we have to look into. And coming to the stress, again, you all know, stress is one of the area which influences all the things. So not only the disease mechanism, even it has its influences genetic expression level also. So this is how this flowchart gives how beautiful relation genetic and epigenetic susceptibility, early life stress, maybe a number of different stressors, intensity, duration of acute or chronic stress, role, witness, type and natural disease man-made, maybe particularly the stress during the antenatal period. So these days we could see the increasing number of cases, that is particular autism spectrum disorders. From Ayurveda, being an Ayurveda physician, from Ayurveda perspective, I understand that the antenatal stress is a major factor. Maybe antenatal stress may be due to the maladjustments of the family life, maybe the work stress, maybe not paying any attention to the fetus, and there are a number of reasons. So these are more often the subjective in nature, though if you undergo any genetic testing, you don't find anything. But very simple mechanism is, as the fetus gets the nourishment from the mother's mother's nutrition, And similarly, fetus gets the whatever the mental nutritionals from the way her mother behaves, the way mother thinks. So these are the something which is how the early life stress leads to timing and developmental stage and brain development and further neuroendocrine stress responsiveness, allostatic process and organism's equilibrium, disparate health and developmental outcomes, ultimately altered psychoneurobiological functioning, and it leads to the chronic disease risk in the field when is been adult. So the stress hormone causes epigenetic changes. Stressful situations usually individual produce a steroid hormone called glucocorticoids, which affects many systems throughout the body. This is chronic exposure of affection of these glucocorticoids, which may alter the expression of the genes. And epigenetic programming by stress, glucocortical, and the human lifespans. So the epigenetic is something which is happens throughout the life. So and at the same time it is also reversible, considering these seeds factor, how you respect these seeds, how you maintain the balanced of these seeds. So epigenetic programming of the neuroendocrine stress response by adult life stress. So this is also an interesting article you can go through. And chronic stress may cause long-lasting epigenetic changes. So that's how the stress has this in a stress system. How the being, if these being respect is maintaining all these seeds in a proper manner. So that can lead to an adaptation, to healthy adaptation to this particular new situation, so new stressful mechanism. And even the study reported from in India, that is early life stress can modify the DNA express study finds. So that's how they studied, particularly research studied 50 children of parents with alcoholism and another was without alcoholism. So that's how, as I said, how the children are reared in an environment and their naturally the expression, genetic expression naturally changes. So I could say there are neurotransmitters I consider as a dose of emotions, how these emotions influence the epigenetics. So D means dopamine, it is a reward or the pleasure hormones triggered by achievements and pleasurable experiences. And O means oxytocin, it's a love hormone triggered by physical touch, emotional bonding, acts of appreciation. And S is serotonin, it's a mood hormone triggered by sense of gratitude and our significance and by food, sleep, and sunlight. And E means endorphins, the pain stress reduction hormone triggered by exercise, laughter, and some types of food. And ultimately, these we consider as epigenetic emotions. So as long as you maintain these emotions in a balanced manner, so your the psychological influence of epigenetic mechanism should be under control. So Achar Rasayana is the field where this lifestyle and behavioral modification is being dealt. So there are different aspects which are described in Ayurveda, that is truthfulness, free from anger, prohibition of alcoholic drinks, excessive indulgence, sex to be avoided, non-violence. One must be peaceful and pleasing in their speech, and regular practice of meditation, and free from ego, affinity towards the spiritual science. All this is considered to the its behavioral modification. So the contemporary we may consider as a joy of giving, joy of forgiveness, power of love, and power of power. All as a whole, it's a be good and do good. So if you look at this image, it's even the slide, even meditation, you can modulate the DNA expression. And coming to the last aspect of these seeds, that is S is social connectivity, how you are being connected. So Ayurveda always considers the wellness, well, you are only the well. So it is illness to wellness. That is illness that starts with I as an individual. Wellness starts, that is we, that is how we are connected with the surroundings. The connection is physical wellness, mental wellness, emotional wellness, environmental wellness, social wellness, and spiritual wellness. Wellness is broad spectrum in Ayurveda. We call it as an Ayurveda holistic approach. So coming to the end of the presentation, I called it the DNA, that is DNA as a daily nurturing through Ayurveda. D means daily, N means nurturing through, that is A means Ayurveda. So spice up your life by adopting and practicing Ayurveda and yoga in day-to-day life. So epigenetic reveals that we are not the victims of our genes. In fact, we are the masters of our genes. The expression of your DNA code is in your hands. So all the seeds we discussed in the previous slides, so modulates your DNA expression, gene expression. And whosoever, maybe this is a new topic, whosoever have the question, they may send the questions on my mail ID. So Thank you. Thank you, one and all.